Thank you for joining us today. My name is Dan Hartledge, and I serve as president of the Louisville Forum. We typically meet on the second Wednesday of every month at Vincenzo's restaurant in downtown Louisville. Today, because of health concerns related to COVID-19, this month's Louisville Forum is meeting virtually. The meeting is occurring by way of Zoom and is also being live streamed on the Louisville Forum Facebook page. The Louisville Forum was founded in 1984. It is a nonpartisan public issues group. The forum hosts debates and discussions of contemporary and sometimes controversial public policy issues that affect the greater Louisville community. Although we may take up issues that have a national interest, we try to highlight it from a local perspective. For more information on the Louisville Forum, on our programs, or to make a reservation for a future program, please visit our website at louisvilleforum.org. Our topic today is Many Voices, One Future. How should Louisville address racial injustice? It's a national issue, of course, but in Louisville, the frustration and pain associated with systemic racism and charges of police brutality has truly bubbled over. The March police shooting of Breonna Taylor, the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, the shooting by a member of the National Guard of David McAtee, has all set off an intense and urgent demand for change. The demand was not created by those tragedies, but the anger and frustration and fear and the true desire for this city to change in deep and dramatic ways certainly came to the surface because of those tragedies. As a result of the last 6 weeks, the last 6 weeks have been like no other in the history of Louisville. Calling for an end to social injustice and systemic racism, many in Louisville are unrelentingly demanding change in how our city operates at its core. And it's a call that is resonating well beyond city government. People of every race, every demographic, businesses, schools, everyone is being challenged to look inwardly and assess their own depths of racism and prejudice. Most say the protests and the protesters have been largely peaceful, disruptive perhaps, but peaceful. Yet it has not all been pretty. The last 6 weeks, we've seen tension and confrontations with the police, tear gas, riot gear, looting, vandalism, and large swaths of downtown businesses closed indefinitely and covered with plywood. So today we have an amazing panel of individuals who will help us digest all of this and to some extent help us sift through the question of where do we go from here. The panelists today are Dr. Nat Irvin, Assistant Dean for Thought Leadership and Civic Engagement Management at the University of Louisville School of Business, Anthony Smith, Executive Director for Citizens United, Kellie Watson, Chief Equity Officer for MSD, and Ricky Jones, Professor and Chair of the Pan-African Studies Department at the University of Louisville. We're going to do things a little bit differently today, although I will be collecting questions from the audience and reading them to the panelists. Dr. Irvin will serve as something of a facilitator and help guide the discussion to ensure that the next few minutes are as enlightening and as helpful as possible. But so we'll start with opening remarks from each panel, each member of the panel, and we will start with Dr. Irvin. I do want to also mention that Anthony is going to have to leave us at about 12:30 for another commitment that he has at shortly after 12:30. So in fact, let's do this. Let's go ahead and got my screen is locking up here. We'll hear from Anthony first. We'll certainly hear from all four panelists before we get into discussion. But Anthony Smith is Executive Director of Cities United, a national network focused on eliminating violence in American cities related to African-American men and boys. Anthony Citizens United was launched in 2011 by Philadelphia Mayor Michael Nutter, who partnered with New Orleans Mayor Mitch Landrieu, among others. Prior to joining Cities United, Anthony was the director of the Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods program in Louisville, serving under Mayor Fisher. Anthony worked with city departments, community and faith-based organizations, community members, and civic and business leaders to develop prevention strategies to reduce violent crime and create better outcomes for the most impacted populations. Anthony has more than 20 years of experience working with civic and political leaders, organizing, facilitating, and building networks to create community change. So Anthony, at this time, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate that. And thanks, Nicole, for inviting me to be a part of the conversation. I think I just want to start. I appreciate your framing and setup, Dan, around that this is going to take all of us, and all of us got to get to a place where we've got to look inward and outward and really think about what we do individually and collectively to address the issues that are at hand. I think I want to start by saying that Louisville's had many opportunities to get this right, but have never fully leaned all the way in and really supported the measures and the issues that were at hand. When I went to work for Mayor Fisher and the team in 2013, it was after we had the triple homicide that then Dr. Blaine Hudson and Dr. Nesbitt came together with a bunch of folks in the community to really put together a plan forward. They went through and talked to lots of community leaders and community members and really laid a plan forward that I was able to then come in and kind of implement and add to. But the office has never fully been supported in the way that it needs to. It's never got the right funding. It's never had the right backing, and it's never had the real political will behind it to really do the work that needs to be done. And I think when you think about the work that the Office for Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods could and would have been doing with the right amount of support, we could be having a different conversation today because it was recommending alternatives to policing and to the criminal justice system and trying to create pathways and ways forward, focus on young Black men and boys, but also just focus on Black and brown communities, but really looking at different ways of different solutions and different avenues that this community could have took. So the office has been around since 2013. We're now at 2020. And it is still fighting for funding when the police department does not have to fight for that same funding. And their numbers don't show that they are actually making an impact, right? So we say we help police to protect and serve, to reduce crime, to interfere with crime, and to interrupt crime. But as you look at numbers, and homicide numbers is what I focus on most days, they continue to tick up. We had our lowest homicide rate in 2014. I think when we were down to 48, the last couple of years has been over 100 plus. But then we still continue to put resources into places that we believe are supposed to answer those questions, but have never answered those questions, right? So for us, when we talk about public safety, we're asking cities and communities at Cities United, because we work across the country, to really think through what does it really mean to have what does public safety really mean? And it's not about law enforcement. It's not about detention centers and jails. It really is around supporting families and giving the families the access to quality housing, access to a livable wage jobs, a reliable transportation, all of the things that you all on this call live where you live because that's what makes you feel safe. And when you think about folks who live in the West End and other communities, where most of the disruption happens is due to the over-policing, but then also a lot of bad policies from redlining to other things that have put us in this place. So I think Louisville, again, has had many opportunities to get it right. Where I'm seeing now is that Louisville seems to not want to listen to the demands of the people on the ground. Folks have been out on the street for over 30 days saying this is what we need and this is what we want. Folks got the no more no-knock warrants passed, but the budget, there was recommendations that the budget shift, and I think folks just moved and actually added more to the police department, if I'm thinking right, about $700,000 more when we know there's already tons of money spent. And if the city would just pause long enough to really think through what is true public safety, what does it really mean, and answer those questions. And then just for the folks on this call, you all are in decision-making roles and in positions that could really shift the way that the city moves and leads if you all made decisions around your hiring practices, your recruitment practices and hiring practices, and just really looking top down to say, are we as equitable as we need to be? Are we as inclusive as we need to be? And if not, why not? And how do we change that? So I think, we've got to do individual work and we got to do collective work, but we also, all of us, need to hold our local elected officials accountable for how they allocate the resources that they are over. And then we've got to make sure that they're moving in a way that gets us to a place where this compassionate city where everybody can live out their dreams and live their lives to the fullest. We've known it's been wrong for a long, long time. Since I've been here in Louisville, born and raised in 1969, right after the riots of 68. So, I mean, the uprising of 68. So it's not a new conversation. It's just, are we going to do different this time? Because I think we can and should. And I also know the young people on the street are not going back home until we do. So either we listen or we continue to have some minor inconveniences in our lives until people get the justice that they want. So again, I just think Louisville has had multiple times to get it right, but it's continued to act as if we can't find our way out of this and continue to do business as usual. And I don't think that's where we are anymore. And I'll pause there and come back to Nat when he's asking questions.
All right. Thank you, Anthony. And I may have, during my introductions, if I said Citizens United instead of Cities United, I beg your pardon.
So good. It's a big difference, but I appreciate you cleaning that up. Cities United, yeah. Yeah,
Cities United. Someone texted me and said, "Hey, I think." So anyway, I apologize. I'm sorry for that. But thanks very much, Anthony. And now we'll hear from Dr. Nat Irving for just a moment. Dr. Irving is an author, innovator, futurist, teacher, composer, and former radio and television commentator. And he serves as Assistant Dean of Thought Leadership and Civic Engagement at Woodrow Strickler Chair, Professor of Management Practice for the U of L College of Business. He teaches graduate courses in the future of management, leadership, and dynamics. Dr. Irving has engaged the leadership and management teams of numerous companies and organizations, including Fortune 100 companies, in strategic conversations focused on the significant social, political, economic, technological, and environmental trends and events that will drive our mid to long-term future. He also serves as a futurist for the National Black MBA Association and the Executive Leadership Council. Dr. Irving has been seen and heard in the national media scene for a lot of years. He has a graduate degree from the University of South Carolina with a Bachelor of Arts degree in philosophy and a Master's in Media Arts. He's also an accomplished composer. He holds a Doctorate of Musical Arts degree in music composition from the University of North Texas and is a graduate of the Institute for Educational Management at the Harvard University Graduate School of Education. So, Dr. Irving, having said that, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Dan, and apologize for that long introduction. Let me I'm going to see if I can move us along faster because I know we don't have long. And Dan, so thank you for the way that you framed it. And as I have thought about this opportunity that we have, I guess the first thing I wanted to say, and I also would like to throw this to our guests, to Ricky, to Kellie, and to Anthony as well. I'm in my 14th year of being here at the University of Louisville, in the community of Louisville. Chandra, my wife, and I moved here from Wake Forest University, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, 2007. And the question I had for us starting off with this conversation, and I'll throw my first comment after I'll make my comment. I'll throw it next to Ricky and Kellie, and that is we moved here. This is my 14th year here, and we love this city of Louisville, and we recognize that it has the same kinds of challenges other cities in America are faced with. And, but for some reason, we, Chandra and myself, we have found this to be a place that has an enormous capacity for loving one another, but it still has this blind spot about race. It still has the same, it is stuck with the same illness that American cities all around the country are faced with. And I wondered, Ricky, you know, you weren't born here, right? So reflect on, why do you care so much, first of all, about Louisville? Kellie, why do you care about the city of Louisville? Anthony, you were born here. I wasn't, but now I'm here. My first time coming to Louisville was in 1963 when my father was at the University of Kentucky. But there's something about this city that we all love, and now here we are faced with this crisis. So why do you care, first of all, Ricky, about the city of Louisville? Why do you care about how we create a more just and equitable society for everybody?
Thank you, Nat. Thank you, Dan, for the invitation. Thank you, Nicole, for organizing all of this. Much respect to my brother, Anthony Smith, who's done fabulous work all over the country in past years. And much love to Kellie Watson, who I've known for a very long time. Let me forego my opening comments so we can get right to the questions. Why do I love Louisville? I wouldn't say that I have a lot of love for Louisville in that way, Nat. I mean, that's not really where I'm coming from. I mean, you're right, I wasn't born here. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I certainly love Atlanta, but I understand Atlanta has problems as well, and Louisville has its problems. Louisville has been good to me in many ways, and it's been challenging in others. And I want to be brief so we can get to Kellie and answer this question as well. My belief is you fight where you are. You know, I love equality. I love freedom. I love the opportunity for all people, no matter their race, no matter their color, their creed, to live as full American citizens, enjoying the constitutional rights that they have and enjoying the humanity that we're all supposed to enjoy as human beings. And so I think it's incumbent upon us all to bravely fight for that consistently and openly, you know, and without apology and without retreat. But beyond that, more than anything else, I'm a father. I have a 12-year-old daughter. While I am not a native Louisvillian, my daughter is. My daughter Jordan was born here. And whether we were in Louisville or in Lebanon, Kentucky, or in the Middle East in Lebanon, I would certainly fight for an equal society in which my child can enter into with more dignity, humanity, and justice. And beyond that, even before I had a child, my thought is that all children should enjoy that. And Black children in America, and certainly in Louisville, have not enjoyed that for a very long time. So at the end of the day, if we're not working to ensure that peace, that humanity, that decency, that ability of our children, any children, whether they be our biological children or not, to enter into the world, you know, with those things, then it's problematic. So, you know, I'm in love with justice, man. I'm in love with decency. I'm in love with humanity. So that's where I'm coming from.
Well, I love that. And Kellie, and Ricky, of course, is speaking toward the future when he talks about the children, not just the past, but in context of the future, which is what brings us here today. We're talking about how do we create a more just and equitable society. And of course, I think of this as a futurist for the next generation. My wife and I just had our first grandchild born in January of this year. And we have 3 kids ourselves who are all in their 30s or just turned 40. So we're always focusing on the future, less on ourselves, but the next generation. What's your perspective, Kellie?
I agree so much. First of all, thank you for having me. Thank you, Dan and Nicole, for the invitation. And always wonderful to see my colleagues, Anthony Smith and Dr. Ricky Jones. But I'm from Louisville, grew up here. I've been here all of my life with the exception of about 5 years when I went to law school and then worked right after that before I moved back. And all of my family is here. So it's important to me that this community be what it needs to be for all of its citizens and all of its residents. And fully agree with what Ricky said in that you fight where you are. I grew up within the NAACP here in Louisville. And so I feel like I've been in the fight for a really long time. And with that fight and the call that I have to service, most of my career has been in government. And it's important to me that, as you stated before, the future is better for our children. And I'm a mother, and all of my work and everything for me came to a head in my life a couple of years ago when my father was murdered in a hate crime with my son, grocery shopping. And so for me, it's even more personal, it's even more intense. And the realization that all of the work that I have done throughout my career wasn't enough to save my father, to not have my son exposed to such a traumatic event, is why I will continue to fight and stand ground where we are, because it's important and explicit that we name it, right? Racism and hate have to be called out for what they are. And we have to be able to have this conversation. We have to be able to name it, to stop being so polite about it, and to work on ourselves individually and collectively, as was stated earlier, if we're really gonna make this change. So I feel like Louisville is at a pivotal moment where people are listening. I feel as though the work that I've done, even when I was the equity officer in the mayor's office prior to this position here at MSD, there are things that are known that other cities have done that can be used to address this. And now is the moment to do it. It's not a time to study it anymore. It's not a time to decide we want to have a plan to study it anymore. It's actually time to do the things that we know are available and can be done.
Thank you, Kellie. Anthony, let's talk about, because you made reference to this a little bit in your opening comments, you were talking about policies. And I think most of us now recognize that this stage in American history, this stage in the history of Louisville, when you just look at the last 50 years or so, longer, of course, obviously, is there needs to be some systematic changes and policies. Would you talk about an avenue, specific policies that the city of Louisville needs to look at that change substantially the outcomes that are affecting disproportionately Black people in the city of Louisville?
Yeah, and I think thank you, Kellie, for staying in the fight and you know, and through your loss. So I just really appreciate you for that. Dr. Irvin, I think the biggest policy and the biggest thing that could change and impact is our budget. How we allocate our resources as a huge opportunity for us to right some wrongs and get some stuff right. And not just the city budget. We got to think about JCPS's budget. You know, there's a number of budgets that impact the public that we don't pay attention to until it's too late. And if we can really think through the budgets and how we allocate our resources to deliver services and programs and processes to people, I think we could have a better outcome. So for me, the number one thing is that we've got to have a different conversation around our budgets. We've got to be willing to have a conversation with JCPS around why schools are funded the way they're funded and why certain schools get less resources than others, and be willing to make those kind of changes if we're really trying to get to the place where we're trying to get to. So for me, first it starts there with budgets, and then we've got to start thinking through the whole criminal justice system around how folks enter into that criminal justice system and find it hard to get out from the bail, right? If I get pulled over and I miss court, which happened to me, I miss court and I don't go to court, somebody knocks on your door and they come and arrest you. And then you go to jail over a speeding ticket. And it's more so that folks are just trying to get fines and dollars and resources. So I think we got to just start thinking through our whole budget process, but then also start thinking through the criminal justice system and then thinking through the education process. Those would be the first three places I would really start when we want to start thinking through policy changes. And I think some of the policies we've got to look at as a community too are those that are harmful, like the no-knock warrants in a stand your ground state make 0 sense. You cannot knock my door down and then tell me I have a right to protect myself. But then when I shoot you for coming to my house, you just happen to be law enforcement, then I get charged So I just think there's a lot of policies and ways that we can change, but I would start with the budget, not just the Metro budget, but also looking at JCPS's budget as well. But then start working through the criminal justice system and thinking through those policies and laws that are actually should not be putting people in jail for, and we can think through different ways to holding people accountable than putting them in jail.
Dr. Jones, same question. What do you think about in context when we think about policies, statutes, the larger context? Because you're a political scientist, theorist, you write about these things all the time. What about, how do you perceive, what do you, when people are asking specifically, what are the policies that we need to change to create a more just and equitable society? How do you come to this?
Look, if we talk about policies and structures in the country, from the curriculum development in K through 12 systems to the curricula in higher education to policies governing gentrification, as I follow some of the questions in the chat, to approaches to incarceration, you see something that shows up consistently across the board that we are missing. I think the discussion is framed poorly when people ask for specifics that are going to solve the problem of white supremacy that's taken centuries in this country to calcify.
Right.
We can't paint ourselves into a corner where somebody says, hey, give me 3 to 5 to 10, things that's gonna fix everything, after we have taken literally centuries to put layer upon layer upon layer, from government to education to media to policing to as far as the eye can see, to set up a system that is based on racial inequity. You see America engaging a number of these things right now, from the fact that we have literally had over 1,800 Confederate statues, memorials, public spaces, buildings, military bases, military vessels named after Confederates in this country. These things still exist on college and university campuses, and people are trying to engage them. You see these things popping up in places that nobody anticipated them popping up. And some folks are saying, well, how far do we go in taking these things down and addressing these issues? I ask a different question. The different question is, how racist has America been? If you really engage this, then you see how racist this country has been, how it is calcified into American culture. So, when people start talking about funding even, Nat, I think they're skipping a point. Economic essentialism is understandable, but it's dangerous. And when I speak of economic essentialism, I'm talking about basing everything on capital. I've never been one to ask people for money. I'm not a person who goes out and pimps or whores myself, for an organization, say, okay, we just need more money, money, money. Yeah, it's a necessary, but not a sufficient condition. Really what we're talking about in Louisville, in America, and everything that we look at is the present. It's not enough to say it's racist. What we're really talking about is white supremacy. And let me explain that very quickly so we can move on to others, because I don't want to dominate the conversation and get to as many questions as possible. When I talk about white supremacy, I'm not just talking about Dylan Roof shooting people in a church in Carolina. I'm not talking about madmen marching through Charlottesville chanting, Jews will not replace us, as they defend Confederate statues in Charlottesville. I'm not just talking about David Duke and Klansmen, running around in hoods. That's not the type of white supremacy that I'm talking about. What white supremacy really is in this country, we don't see it in every space in which we function. Generally speaking, there are white people in control of structures who feel that they are the ones who have the right to know, think, and decide. So even if Black people in these spaces come up with ideas, those ideas still have to be approved. They have to be green lighted by whites. That is white supremacy. If we don't work in America, and in Louisville in particular, because this is where we are, in every structure, from us at the University of Louisville to Kellie, at MSD, or anybody in Metro government to the police department, if Black people are not equally sharing in the decision-making process, that is going to change statutes, that is going to change policies, that's going to change curriculum, that is going to change approaches to gentrification, that is going to decide whether or not the Attorney General releases a report on what happened to Breonna Taylor or not, then we're still within the same structure that we were in before. It's just dressed up a little bit. So until we all equally share in that ability, then we're gonna have problems. And you can throw as much money at it as you want in point instances to make people feel good for a month or two, or a year or two, or even a decade or two. if you do not address those fundamental power sharing decision making processes, then you're in the same place.
So Ricky, let me follow up with let me go to Kellie and Anthony. You still with me, right? Is Anthony still with me?
I think he had to leave at 12:30.
Anthony just had to step
Okay.
out.
So
Yeah.
Kellie, let's follow up on what Ricky has just represented. And what it seems to me he's saying, and I'm gonna frame it in a slightly different way, is representation. Because we know that in the city of Louisville, when you look across a broad spectrum of leadership positions, whether that's in the private sector, the public sector, in just sort of the broad picture of leadership, one of the things you notice is an absence, that we don't have critical masses of Black faces in leadership positions. We have some here, we have some there, a sprinkling. And it seems to me that what Ricky is proposing would work if there were representation of Black people in these positions, but we don't have them. Am I wrong or right about saying you need to be there? Louisville needs to have a greater representation of minorities, Black people in particular, if we're going to do some of what Dr. Jones just described, having an impact on public policy or private policy decisions. Your take.
I agree that representation is important, but it's still going to be those individuals that are represented in that group still playing within the same systematic racist structures that are already present. And so what you've got to recognize is that just not with representation, but there's also the power that comes with that, and also being actually included and having that voice. It's one thing to say, I want Kellie Watson at the table and in the room, but if every time I speak, I am interrupted, I am not heard, I am disregarded, then it doesn't matter whether or not I'm there or not. And all I've given you is a twofer. You got a Black woman at the table and you can check that off for yourself. So it's much more important than just having the representation. So any organization, whether it be government, whether it be higher ed, whether it be philanthropy, whether it be a nonprofit, whoever it is, you have to make sure that not just are your demographics appropriate and representative of the community, but you have to make sure that people have the same power and influence at the table that others do within that structure. And in addition to that, that you're also, it's one thing to recruit me and say, this is a star. She is so important and here she is. And then when I get there, I'm also, as I said, now I'm angry, now I'm aggressive, now I'm all the key words that are always thrown at Black people once they speak up and pretend to have a voice at the table. So you have to make sure that your workplace, that your environment is also inclusive, and that people are able to bring, this is cliche, but bring your whole self to work. You want me, my knowledge, my experience, and everything that comes with me to be able to better the organization and change those policies and practices that need to be changed. You don't want someone to just sit at the table and feel that way. And what happens time and time again, and I know from just many professionals that have been in the room, they're recruited, then they get there, and then they're a problem, and then they leave. And it is about the workplace. And that can be whether it's the police department, it can be whether it's the fire department, it could be at a university, it could be in the C-suite, if we're lucky enough to be there. And you're always going to be the only one if you are there. And that's a really heavy burden all of the time, to make sure that you are speaking for all of your people every time you're in the room.
Dr. Irving,
can I talk? Yeah, go right ahead, Rick.
Yeah, I was going to say we have some questions from the audience. If we could maybe hit on a couple of those.
Dan, before we get to that, can I speak to something? Because I want to piggyback on what Kellie just said, and we have an emerging exchange in the chat about really what Kellie was just talking about. And I want to speak to Brother Alan Priest's exchange in the chat, because I think it's very, very important. He is pushing a narrative. He says that, Dr. Jones seems to be very confrontational. And can't you get things done without being confrontational? Said being confrontational, engage in a name call. People who know me know I'm a really nice guy. My default is to be a teddy bear. Nat, you know that. Terry Myers knows that. Everybody knows that. But at the same time, it is very interesting to me how many whites will say if a black person does not speak in soft tones, doesn't coddle them, doesn't code switch, that you're confrontational. Yeah, you gotta be, this respectful type of person, which again is another manifestation of white supremacy. And calling white supremacy what it is not name calling. It's just clear. The brother also says this, that we're just speaking about things that are impacting the Black community, and wouldn't the same be true for all minorities? This is true to some degree, but let me speak to a couple of things. This is the problem with the diversity, inclusion, and equity movement as it's currently moving forward in America. Whites tend to lump everybody who is not white into one category. You can be Black, you can be gay, you can be Latinx, you can be, an immigrant, you can be continental African. They're putting everybody into the same group and feels that these groups do not have individual concerns from those groups that must be spoken to. Black Americans have a unique relationship with this country that is unlike any other group. And every group has the right to have its organic spokespeople come to the table and speak to the concerns of those groups. And if you lump them all together, that is in effect somehow homogenizing them in a way that I think is unhealthy, and it is disingenuous, and it's easy. Lastly, this, and I think this is where Kellie's speaking to, and this is a big problem in Louisville, going back to this idea of being confrontational. Folks can talk about, okay, you gotta have somebody who looks like you at the table. It doesn't matter if somebody Black is at the table and they're saying the same things that people at the table have been saying forever. It doesn't matter. That is just a placeholder. That is a Black face. Clarence Thomas is on the Supreme Court of the United States, but he has no sensibilities where the Black community is concerned in this country. And Black people will tell you that. And I think honest white people will tell you that. So Louisville, every space, whether it be government, the university, any company, y'all have really got to get out of this nasty, nasty habit of choosing the safest Black people who won't rock the boat, who will adhere to the status quo and assimilate and not disturb any of the white brothers and sisters around them for the sake of peace, but they won't speak to justice because they're concerned with individual vulgar careerism, one. And two, they're afraid if they do tell you the truth, you're gonna say they're confrontational and you're gonna ruin them. So that is something that is really, really clear. So it's always interesting to me that when there's a Black woman or a Black man who displays the same characteristics as successful white men who don't speak in soft tones, who are very aggressive, who even use a lot of profanity, they'll go, oh, he's hard driving. He's a no nonsense guy. He's a go-getter. But a Black woman, hey, they got all kind of names. So she's an angry Black woman, or he's a threatening Black man. So people need to really check that stuff. So hopefully I answered your question, Brother Priest. Let's go have some bourbon and we can talk about it further.
Thank you, Ricky. Dan, what do we got from the audience?
Well, I appreciate
brothers too.
And I appreciate you, Ricky, seeing some of the questions there and some of the comments and chiming in. That's very, very helpful to the audience.
Right.
A couple of questions that we're receiving both on Zoom here and also through Twitter have to do with the Attorney General investigation. Questions having to do what's a reasonable expectation on when we might see something. I realize you guys probably don't know a whole lot of the inner workings there, but one questioner says, will you, meaning perhaps some or all of you on the panel, ask the AG for his report and his findings ASAP? And the third question being asked on that is, if charges are not filed against the officers, what is the possible outcome in terms of protest and reaction on the street?
Yeah, that's one of my questions, and I think it's one of the great concerns that I think most people in the city of Louisville are now anxiously awaiting. I don't have any time. I don't have any idea when the Attorney General is going to offer his report, but it does seem like he's taken an awful long time. My concern is if this report comes back and it does not significantly indicate wrongdoing on the parts of the police department, specifically police officers, I'm not sure how the community is going to respond. And I think this is part of why, obviously we're having this forum today, but it speaks to why do we let things get to a point of where we have to have an incident like this to bring us to the point of where now everybody realizes, wait a minute, what's been going on in our city? Why do we have policies that have allowed this kind of a thing to happen? Why does the fraternal order of police have such an extraordinary role over the way that police are disciplined? How did we get ourselves in this position to the extent of where an incident that has happened to George Floyd in Minneapolis, Breonna Taylor here in Louisville, can put us at the brink of where we don't know what is going to happen as a result of an outcome? And it seems to me that points to the larger context, which I am hoping that our larger community, specifically the white community, will see, where have you been? Where has the private sector been, in particular the leadership of the private companies, the private sector? Where have you been in context of addressing the issues of social justice for the larger community? How do we let these kinds of things happen? And I think for us, this is a pivotal moment in the city of Louisville. It is obviously a pivotal moment for the country as we reconcile with the relationship between our communities, specifically of the Black community, and the justice. And it offers, I think, a window how we would respond. Who knows what will happen? We all obviously on pins and needles about what might happen downtown. I don't know what's going to happen downtown, but it is a moment, I think, pregnant with opportunity to invite a larger segment of our community who's been absent from, if not feeling the effects of thinking that these kinds of things were not their problems, were not their issues. They are. We are all. Ricky mentioned about compassionate city, maybe Anthony did too. The way I'm thinking about this now is we have to start to recognize that we are interdependent, that what happens in one part of the community has a direct impact on every other part of our community. What happens in education is having an impact on our ability to be able to recruit new companies to our community. What's happening to our children is having an impact on our competitiveness. Our health, for example, we now understand in a way that we probably didn't understand as a result of COVID, the disproportionate impact that this disease is having on one particular part of our community, and how now we're all connected because we're all part of the same community. The outcomes that affect one community is going to impact all of the systems. And I think that's where I see us now in this moment, whatever the Attorney General, whatever that decision is, it is but one of many of these kind of pivotal moments that American cities around the country are being faced with, and we here in the city of Louisville faced with. Now, I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to ask maybe Kellie, you might want to respond, and then Ricky as well.
I think that part of the problem with this whole situation has just been the lack of transparency around what has happened and what has not happened. And part of the reason why you see people protesting is that lack of transparency and the historic lack of accountability that also goes with that. And so I think that a continued lack of accountability will continue to have people protesting, because what we're asking for, what people are needing to see, is the things that have been happening all over the place. Yes, Breonna Taylor is the latest incident in Louisville, but there have been many more, not just in Louisville, but across the country. And so what this has shown is that there is a lot of power within the FOP and police. There is a lot of power and structure within their collective bargaining agreements. There is a lot of systematic power that people don't understand, and it doesn't touch them until now. And these things have been in place for a really long time. These things have been in place for, I've worked for the city for 20 years, so let's just say a good 20 years, right? And so now what you have is the actual light on there that needs to be there, that shows and highlights the systematic problems that we've been talking about for a really long time. Granted, at this moment, because you are quarantined and you are at home, you can't not look at it anymore. You can't not see it. You can't not see that man's knee on his neck, and you have to deal with it, and it's in your face at this moment. But I think until we bring community into the solution as well, when we look at how we want to solve these issues, we'll still have people protesting.
Ricky?
There's no need for me to add anything to
Yeah.
that. I think it was well stated by Nat and Kellie.
We have a few questions also regarding the mayor. Simple question to all of you. Should the mayor resign?
Oh, I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I think it's been an extraordinary challenge for anyone in leadership to negotiate the extraordinary events that have happened around the tragic killing of Breonna Taylor. That in and of itself is a monstrous thing to have to act that has happened to her family that suffered it. That's one thing. Then you're in the midst of a pandemic, which is, we've not had anything like this since 1918, which has disrupted all the systems. I think it's easy to be able to say he should resign, but managing in the midst of what I would describe as a social hurricane is not easy. And I'm sure he thinks I'm sure he can reflect back and he should have done this, maybe should have fired the chief earlier. But that's not going to really, fundamentally, you take the mayor out of it, the situation remains the same. And the structural, the challenge that we're faced with is fundamentally with us, past the idea of Mayor Greg Fisher, to sort of isolate him as like, if we could just get rid of him, things would be better. I just think I'm sorry, I'm not going to, no, I would just go ahead and say, I think it's nonsense. People have their opinions about it. But no, has he been perfect? No, but I don't think he should resign, no.
Okay, yeah. No, I don't think he should resign, but he needs to adjust. To use a sports analogy, which my friend Terry Myers and I often use, the world is running an air raid offense right now. And the mayor is still playing the mayor is still playing a 3 yards in a cloud of dust game. And look, I know the mayor, I like him a lot. He shouldn't resign, but he needs to adjust to a radically different reality in the world. And that's going to be difficult for him, not just because of him as an individual, and I have long felt this, and let me say it publicly, he has some really, really bad advisors around him. And that needs to change for him to see the world through a different lens.
One other thing that has not come up, but and I think is one that bears elevating during this conversation, and which is that a part of what is now fundamentally a part of the conversation of how do we create a more just and equitable society is the notion of reparations. And in the argument very clearly is this, that how can we, even as a city of Louisville, just a part of a larger America since 1619, and when you look at just how, not slavery, but just look at the last 100 years and the structural parts of inequality that have led to the huge gap in wealth, the way that the law has been used to systematically deprive Black people of being able to accumulate wealth over time, to be restricted when they could buy a house, or how the restrictions that are just sort of have been built in, which now we're starting to, I'm saying as a community, starting to become much more familiar. I think this issue of reparations and how that might become a part of the larger conversation is something, how it is becoming a part of the larger conversation is something that the city of Louisville too will have to come to grips with. It's not a local issue as sometimes it is portrayed here. It is a national issue of thinking about how do we address the fundamental issue of inequality in wealth that has been accumulated, has developed as a result of a structural decision by our state, local, and federal governments. And Ricky, I know you have a lot of opinion about that, but Dan, I think that is going to be something that the larger white community has got to be more comfortable with. How that might manifest itself, I don't know, but it is, I think, in play now of saying, moving beyond just the personal attitudes that people have, whether they're racist, whether they are in support of a statue or not. I think our conversation now has moved to where structurally We need to fundamentally address something through the larger mechanisms of government, the larger mechanisms of the structures that have been embedded in the way that brings us to where we are now.
Thank you. Another question has to do with voter suppression. Now, the question specifically, how do we overcome the issue of voter suppression that ensures white people continue to dominate the system? I'll piggyback on that question by asking about your reaction to how the elections went in the primary here in Kentucky with mail-in absentee ballots.
Ricky?
Feedback.
Yeah, I think it is really important to understand a couple of things. One, the consistent talk that we usually hear from the right, and I know my friend Scott Jennings, you know, my nemesis is on here as well if he's still around. And people think, you know, Scott and I are sitting outside of, you know, people's house, of each other's houses, shooting, you know, using bows and arrows against each other. We're not. You know, I like Scott a lot, but ideologically we're you know, worlds apart. One, the talk about voter fraud in this country, there is no such thing as voter fraud in America. I want to be very, very clear, and I want to repeat that smiling so people don't think I'm being confrontational about it. There is no such thing as voter fraud in America. It is difficult to get people who are eligible to vote, in fact, in this country to actually do it. Nobody is cheating, but voter suppression is real. And voter suppression has been around since 1870, since the passage of the 15th Amendment, which gave Black men at that time the right to vote. In an odd half century in America, women, no woman, Black or white or other, had the right to vote until 1920 with the passage of the 19th Amendment. There is no voter fraud, but there is voter suppression. And quite often, voter suppression movements come from the Republican Party. Let me call y'all out on that. You have to own it. It is a smaller party, and they understand that if they keep the voting rolls smaller, they have greater chances of winning on local, state, and in national elections. So we have to be clear about that. So voter suppression is real, and people need to pay attention to voter suppression in every locality, every state, and nationally, right? When we speak about the Kentucky elections that just happened, Kentucky actually did a decent job, even though I think having one polling site in Louisville was problematic. Most people from the right and the left agree on that. That probably needs to be expanded. But when you talk about mail-in voting, that needs to be automatic. We're in a technological age. I think people should be able to vote from their cell phones at this point. We need to make voting easier, not harder. But we have to be careful not to give ourselves too many kudos on what happened during the primaries, because during a global pandemic, the state Republican-dominated legislature passed another voter ID law in April, which takes effect for the general election in November, and that is yet another manifestation of voter suppression. So we have to be really, really clear about that. And there's some really interesting comments going on in the chat too. Hopefully we won't run out of time and talk about that. So the takeaway for this, students, there is no voter fraud in America. There is voter suppression, which we need to fight against.
Absolutely.
Let me, unfortunately, to your point, Ricky, we are just about out of time.
Oh my goodness.
Having said that, there's a question that was submitted that says, talking about some of the goodness that has emerged as a result of all of this hurt. Maybe if we could go around to each of you on the panel and just take 15 or 20 seconds to touch on some of the goodness that has emerged as a result of the pain in the last 6 weeks.
Kellie?
I think some of the goodness, or one of the things that I have noticed, is that people are willing to individually look at and talk about race. A lot of times what we see is, like I said, it's always the determining factor in amongst a lot of decisions. It's never acknowledged. It's never talked about. And now I think people have begun to see that and are willing to have that discussion and educate themselves and learn more.
Ricky?
On what's good? You know, there's a feverish rush right now, Nat and Dan and Kellie and people who are joining us today, of a lot of Black folk who have been speaking to these issues for a very long time. there's a feverish rush among some of them to come up with some panacea plan in 2 weeks that's going to fix everything. That's not going to happen. Good, maybe what's bad in the long run. I think Kellie is right. What's good right now is America is being forced, Louisville is being forced to really give an account, an honest account of how we dealt with one another right now. But one of the people in the chat asked, you know, how long is this going to last? I mean, America is an ADD nation, man. I mean, America's trying to pretend right now by ignoring it that a global pandemic is just simply going to disappear. You know, people are running around the beaches and businesses, and you are seeing numbers spike. So if people are willing to risk their lives, to risk their children by pretending that a global pandemic is a hoax and is going to disappear, I don't know, like some minor STD that will go away on its own, they will certainly ignore race as we move forward. So I certainly wonder how long this conversation will go on, how honest the conversation will be. And if I could leave everybody with this, I think it is very important for us not to approach everything from 10,000 feet, because I think the exchanges are important. That's why I'm so glad that my brother Scott Jennings is here. So people will think that we are like polar opposites, and we are, but we both believe in open, honest public debate, right? The marketplace of ideas. And he's smart enough, as I am smart enough, to change our opinions as we move forward once we have those contestations and our ideas are seen to be, you know, wrong, because the times will change. But I say to everybody, in your individual spaces, if you're real, everybody putting out these Black Lives Matter statements now, all the businesses, all the schools, we love Black people. Hold them to account. Make sure that their words match their actions in the long run. I know that Nat, myself, and others are willing to do that at the University of Louisville. Do it in your space too, at your university, at your company, in your sector of government, you know, at your country clubhouse, wherever. You know, make sure that people's actions are matching up with their words. And if their actions don't match up with their words, then be confrontational and call them out publicly. As I told my friend Terry Miners, make no mistake, I am a snitch. I am a public snitch. If you are somebody who is doing wrong, but say you're doing right, I will tell on you. I will tell on you publicly, and then you'll have to deal with it. So I'm encouraging everybody else, y'all need to be snitches too. I appreciate you having me today.
You know, Ricky, thank you for that, and Kellie. I tell you what brings me hope, and that is this, that when you look at the founding of our country, as flawed as it was in terms of its operation, the extraordinary idea that people could imagine a country out of their minds, to create a country out of an idea based on just the notion that people from all these different groups could come together and create a nation is really, really powerful. Now, our founders, of course, screwed it all up because they said, well, what we really mean is for white people. But truly, though, the idea, the universal idea of trying to create a nation out of all these different kinds of folks to bring together is a very powerful human idea. Now, it is the fact that we have struggled to realize this amazing idea of a country, and then to watch it now as it is struggling with how to make it become real, gives me hope, because I saw and I see, now I'm age 68, I'll be 69 next month, I've seen a lot of changes within the broader community for how this idea could become possible. And that means fundamentally, we're going to have to structurally change the way we think about capitalism, the way we envision our social and economic systems, and it is well under play. Now, when you look at the voices of those who have been protesting downtown on Jefferson Square, they are not going anywhere, even if the protests stop. One should not think that this is something that is seasonal, or that this will be done as soon as the weather turns cold. No, no. This is a fundamental, we are in a fundamental social hurricane of redefining more explicitly, and I think more eloquently, what this American ideal is, this thing that is beyond each one of us, but we all participate in it. Now, the challenge is, though, if we don't do this fiction that we've created, that is what the American story is, which is a fiction, it is something that we all come together on. If we don't do this democracy that we have taken for granted will disappear, as others have historically. There is no guarantee that this is going to work out. You know, Americans are pretty lazy when it comes to the notion of democracy. You know, we've always had it. There's no guarantees. It's really actually a careless mistake on our part to think that we can just always be here. No, it's not. And it can disappear quickly, and empires can fall quickly, and ours is no different. Ours is singular in the way that our country has come to be, flawed as it is singular in the way it has come to be. It's a very powerful idea, but we can certainly lose it. And I think as a city, we have now seen how quickly things that we've taken for granted, it'll always be this way. No, the demographics of America are underway. They're fundamentally changing we're in 2020, by 2024 and 2028, the majority of people who are under the age of 18 voting eligible will be people that we call minorities today. Within basically a generation and a half, all of America from a demographic standpoint has changed. And so my hope is when I see my young MBA students, many of them who are white, not exclusively, when I see and hear from them, I hear a very different way of thinking about America. I hear a much more concerned about that balance between stakeholder and shareholder. They're much more interested, not just in the stakeholders, they want shareholders. They want the larger context of what, you know, policies that we have, how are they impacting everybody else? They're better than the boomers have been, in particular, I'm talking about white boomers, they're better than many instances their parents have been. So that's why I'm optimistic, and that's why I was glad to be invited to be a part of this conversation today. Thank you.